And then, of course, Robert can use it for however he wants to, or edit the beginning however he wants for his
Yeah,
channel.
that sounds
Um,
like a plan.
yeah,
Put it
that's
in
the way
there.
we've always done it. Give everybody
It
a
just
copy, and then you put your own thing on it and spread it out, man. Let everybody.
it didn't feel right the last time.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of
The
weird. Kind of weird.
takeoff and everything, and Robert's never heard it. He's
Oh,
never.
okay, cool.
So do
Well, it's
the
funny.
you're gonna have to do the takeoff and the landing too. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll do the whole thing.
that way,
Basically.
yeah,
Well,
you'll.
this show is kind of like flying a saucer.
Hmm. Okay, so whenever you are ready, I can hit
Pull the stream.
record and stuff, and we can get going. Let
Okay.
me.
Are we streaming yet?
We are streaming right now.
Okay.
We're just not
Okay.
recording the episode at the
Okay.
moment.
We're like 4 minutes before takeoff, so we're taxiing. We're waiting our turn. Everyone is boarded. The ramp is withdrawn. The airlock is sealed. Another Hannibal is just lifting off.
Oh,
We're in
that
line.
that reminds me. Did you get to see my new background for you?
Which one? I don't know. I was looking at a
Rob.
couple of you. I was looking at that cool thing you did with all those Edworthies.
Oh no, this one is
It was
for.
like that was magnificent. I just love that. All those different you just had them coming in and out. It's really cool.
It annoys the heck out of Bob Dubs. I was like, yeah, dude. It drives her nuts. She's like, there's just way too many Mark Edwards.
How can there be too many Mark Edwards?
You know it. I mean, come on, man. But yeah,
uh,
I've got some cool backgrounds and stuff for the
excellent,
for that. So
excellent. So much stuff to check out. I have lists and lists of things I haven't seen yet. It's amazing.
I believe I've got it. So yeah.
But,
Yeah, I figure like monk in Tokyo, overseas. That's,
Yeah,
that's pretty.
did you see that link that he had me send you?
yes, the Shaolin and the one on the Silk Route or the Silk Road.
Yeah, he also
Um,
wanted to talk to you about the Bodhi or the Bon and how
oh, the
they
Tibetan, yeah, the Bon and the Tibetan Buddhists and stuff. Yeah.
how
Well,
they
I was gonna, yeah, I'll, what I know of it, I'm happy to share. I mostly know about Theravada, but yeah, the Bon are an interesting group. We can talk about them and
And
about what
about
happened to Buddhism.
yeah, about
Yeah.
so
uh,
2 minutes to go if you guys
Okay. All
Buddha's
right.
ice. They call them the Buddha's ice, where
Sorry.
the Buddhist sets up in the mountain with snow.
Oh, right. Mm.
Have
Well, they
you
have
ever heard of the three laughing Buddhists?
the three what Buddhists?
Three laughing Buddhists.
The laughing. Yeah, that's related, I think, to Bhutto. But we'll be talking about this in the course of the show because I think it's almost time for us to take off. I
yeah.
definitely see
Yeah.
that the run cleared. We're in line, and I think I was able to cut in front of that other Hannibal. The pilot is shaking his fist at me, but sorry, Herman. Either you move, you lose.
It is 7:59 my time, 8:59 your time. So,
All right. Why don't we get the stream going, and
okay.
by the time that's all going, we'll.
I'll do my cool freaking countdown and then
Yeah,
give it
good.
over to you. So we did pretty good. Got everything on here with 5 minutes to spare. So 3,
Excellent.
2, 1, now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome aboard Clandestine International Airlines, flight number 7. I'm your captain, Otto Excelsior, here with my co-pilot and electronic warfare officer, Roger Hanson. And today we have a guest, Robert Hanson, who's on the show to talk a little bit about Buddhism. We're going to talk a little bit about how Buddhism has changed over time and as it traveled. But we have just cruising altitude of 32,000 feet. Not much turbulence right now. There might be some bumps later on according to our radar, but everything should be okay. I'm going to turn the seatbelt light off so you can unbuckle, and the smoking lamp is lit. You can smoke them if you have them. And I'm going to turn on the automatic pilot. So we are now cruising on automatic. Roger, good to have you back.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. We can't go anywhere without our electronics warfare officer and co-pilot.
It's true.
And we depend on that in order to get through. It's amazing the sorts of things we encounter as we fly high over the Himalayas on our way to an undisclosed location. But we have a special guest today, Robert Hanson. Robert, it's good that you're here. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Looking to understand more of it.
Excellent, excellent. Hopefully we can do that. And yeah, so why don't we jump right in now, Robert? You're interested in talking about, as I understand it, we were going to talk about how Buddhism moved from its central, when it was first taught by the Buddha in India. Later on, it moved to other countries over time, and it kind of changed as it went to different places. And this was brought about to a great extent travelers and merchants and missionaries, people that deliberately went to convert people to Buddhism. The Silk Road or Silk Route was a major highway in this, although people, I'm sure, also went by sea and traveled other ways. And you also were interested, you sent me a link to something about the Shaolin practices in China. Yeah. Well, let me just go talk a little bit about Buddhism's origin. We talked about this last time about the Buddha teaching and everything. So after the Buddha founded the Sangha, after the Buddha founded the group of people to practice Buddhism and preserve it, he, as all of us do, died. In Buddhism, they say he entered peri-nirvana, and almost immediately, without him as the central teacher, because when he was alive, if you had a question, you could just ask him. And he always was ready to answer questions. In fact, they say before he lay down to die, because he knew he was going to go soon, he said, are there any questions, basically? He asked like 3 times, do you have any questions? And he said, follow the rules that I laid down. Just stick with the rules and you'll be okay. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. But almost immediately, things began to change, and you couldn't have the Buddha step in and say, no, don't do that. And you know how it is. If the boss is gone and somebody says, hey, the boss wouldn't like that, well, who are you? You're not my boss. I'll do it the way I want. So almost immediately, there was some concern that Buddhism was going to change. So there was a meeting, First Buddhist Council, where they got together and they decided that, these are the rules. And unfortunately, people have their own opinions. It tended to be a split off between groups of monks. It wasn't anything like the Catholics and Protestants, but it was just some monasteries and some groups of monks tended to practice in certain ways. Others tended to emphasize other bits. So there was a divergence. But then Buddhism started traveling. And that's when you got really, really big changes. Because when you're very, very far away from the source of the teachings, and especially if there's just a few of you, and maybe what you've got, like later on when they started writing stuff down, maybe you just had books. It's not the same as having teachers and monks and universities. They had Buddhist universities and schools and stuff. So you could drift into odd ideas. And another factor is when people hear a religion, a new religion, they tend to make it kind of like their religion. When Buddhism first came to the West, the first thing people did was start comparing Buddha to Jesus. And the thing is, a lot of what the Buddha said is very Christian. Don't hurt people, practice virtue, I always I used to say when somebody was talking about, um, their Christian parents might not be thrilled with meeting a Buddhist if they met me, and I said, well, I don't know any Christian that's going to object to meeting someone who said that he's not going to kill, lie, cheat, steal, or get drunk. These are all things that most religions will support. You want a healthy society and happy, healthy, moral people. So we started comparing, and that there was a poem, "The Light of Asia," and G.K. Chesterton, the Catholic apologist, thought very highly of Buddhism because he saw a lot of similarities. But Buddhism is not Christianity. In the same way, when Buddhism went to China, a lot of Chinese people conflated it with Taoism. Now, there's a lot of things in Buddhism that are similar to Taoism. And Taoism was founded by a guy named Lao Tzu, traditionally. And a lot of Chinese people, when they met these Buddhist missionaries, they said, oh, we've already kind of got this. This must be stuff that you heard about from Lao Tzu, but you got it wrong. He didn't quite mean that. And it took a while for some people to realize that Buddhism really, although it's similar to Taoism, it's really asking different questions. It's looking for different answers than Taoism. Sort of like Christianity has a lot of similarities to Buddhism in some ways, but Christianity has different questions, different goals. So as it moved out, it changed very radically sometimes because, well, let's get to Tibet, because everyone's interested in Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibet, when Buddhism got there, it ran into what's known as the religion of the Bon Po, the priests of the Bon religion. And the indigenous Tibetan religion seems to have been basically a kind of jumped up shamanism, right? They talked to spirits. They did this through inducing ecstatic states in their minds, and they would do this with weird yoga exercises, drugs, extreme ascetic practices, meditating stark naked in the cold, fasting. They would push themselves to a lot of different extremes in order to get these heights and contact these spirits and gods. So when Buddhism ran into this, none of this is Buddhist. But what happens is when Buddhism comes to a country, they don't just drop their old religion. And Buddhism doesn't insist that you drop any other religion. Buddhism doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't be a Christian, or you shouldn't be an animist, or you shouldn't be a whatever. Buddhism just says, I'm going to teach you about Buddhism. And people start looking at their old religion through Buddhist eyes. That's why when you read Buddhist texts, you read a lot about meditating and how to control your mind and how to be virtuous and how not to harm people. But there's also stuff about, spiritual beings, angelic beings, right? Godlike beings that talk to people and this and that. This is all the original religious ideas of the people that were taught Buddhism. And Buddhism didn't say, none of that's real. Stop believing in that. They said, okay, if you want to talk about this spirit that maybe your village has been worshiping for all this time, let's look at that spirit from a Buddhist point of view. Maybe that spirit converted to Buddhism. Maybe that spirit can, so it was the same thing in Tibet. All of a sudden, some of these really fierce, scary, like, demonic spirits that they used to have the shaman, you'd pay the shaman and he'd come and tame it. You were sick. Oh, by the spirit of something or other. And you've seen those Tibetan paintings, big tongues and staring eyes and fangs and dripping skulls. Now, instead, you went to the Buddhist monk, and the monk converts the spirit to Buddhism, and all of a sudden he becomes a guardian of the Dhamma. So instead of being now they're a wrathful protective deity, and they protect good Buddhists, and they protect Buddhist temples and shrines. So you had that combination of the two, and that's a good thing, because you're getting the people to the Buddhist path. But it's also not really Buddhism the way Buddha taught it. And I've often said the Buddha would not recognize I think a Buddhist monk from Tibet with the hat and the human thigh bone trumpet, and they would sometimes use human skulls for drinking vessels, and they would drink occasionally, which is again a complete no-no in Buddhism. Now the Bon still exist, the Bon Po, and the Bon religion. They go at great length to say how they are much older than Buddhism. They were there first. But what's interesting about the Bon Po is that a lot of their religion just seems to be like a mirror image of the Buddhists. And I think I've talked about this. So if the Buddhists circumambulate, clockwise around a stupa, like a something with a relic, the Bon, they do it the other way. They go counterclockwise because we're not Buddhists. We do it different. But really, that's just showing that they're just reacting. It's not really their own mission. They're just trying to demonstrate. It's like if everybody is wearing a blue shirt, you're different. So you're going to wear a green shirt. That'll show them that you're not controlled. Well, you are controlled because you're doing it in reaction to what they're doing. So another interesting thing that happened with Buddhism was when it got to China. Now, you guys know Buddhist monks are supposed to beg for their food. Buddhist monks are not supposed to grow food or produce food. They're completely dependent upon charity. That was one of the ideas. And you've seen pictures in Southeast Asia, Buddhist monks go out every day in the morning with their little bowl. Actually, the bowl is like a couple of gallons. They're really big bowls. And go out through the village, and every villager will give them like a spoonful of rice. Very little from each household, although some will give more. But I mean, if you just give a spoonful and you go to a village, and my friend who was a monk was saying, the one, sometimes, you go to this one village and there's so many people wanting to put food in your bowl, and you tell them just a spoonful. But the more food they give, the more merit, right? So a lot of them try to put in extra food, and you can't even get to the end of the line of people. Your bowl is just overflowing, and you're telling, no, just put a little in. Just put a little in. In China, they don't do that, okay? China, when they had these monks say, we have food, they looked at them and said, go get a job. It just wouldn't work. So the Buddhist monks there had to start farming. They actually had to start, and again, that is a big no-no when it comes to the rules of monks, but it was something they had to do for Buddhism to survive there, so it changed. And that started the whole vegetarian trend of Buddhism, because if the Buddhists were going to start growing food, well, that was breaking a rule bad enough, but there's no way they could have animals. Because if you're killing animals, that's a complete no-no. So that all their food had to be vegetarian. They weren't allowed to process animal food. And so it became a custom of monks to eat vegetarian food. And then pretty soon that became a rule in some groups, but it became a general trend. Now, Theravada Buddhism, which is the closest thing we have to the original Buddhism that the Buddha taught, in my opinion, vegetarianism is not insisted upon. Because if you go to the store, we've talked about this, right? If you buy a hamburger, found a hamburger at the store, you didn't hurt the cow, you didn't kill the cow. There's no bad karma for you just because you eat the meat. In fact, you don't want the meat to go to waste. Now, if you decide you want to be a vegetarian, you do get karma points for that, I believe. There's nothing wrong. If you say, I'm going to be a vegetarian with the intention of causing less suffering, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But you don't get any points off just because you have a hamburger, as long as you didn't kill the cow, and as long as somebody didn't kill the cow just for you. It's like, Robert and Roger are coming to dinner. I'm going to kill this cow just for them. And then they tell you, I killed this cow for you. Then you have to say, no, I can't eat that. But I'll have that hot dog instead. So it's a little complicated. So yeah, as it moved and often along the Silk Route, and that's an interesting point too. I don't want to forget that, because one of the interesting things about Buddhism is Buddhism was, and this doesn't get much emphasis, but when the Buddha founded his Sangha, he called his teachings the noble, right? The noble truths, the Four Noble Truths, that he has a noble path, and that the Sangha is the noble Sangha when they attain to enlightenment. So noble means Arya. right, in Pali, from which we get the word Aryan. And it had to do with a class of people. They had the caste system in India even then. So you had the Brahmins, and you had the Kshatriyas, who are the warriors, and you had the Sudras, you had like all these other groups, and they were like considered different races. You didn't intermarry, you didn't even eat with them and stuff. The Buddha said, if you come to me and you join my Sangha, you are now a member of the Arya group. In other words, your race doesn't matter, where you came from, your background. If you come here, you are a noble one. It was really a way of kicking over the caste system. And that was one of the reasons Hindus didn't like Buddhism in some ways, because you could be any race, anything. If you come to Buddhism, you're a Buddhist. And that's that. And they took no notice. In fact, I remember one Buddhist teacher saying that, one of the basic meditations of Buddhism is you contemplate the body. You contemplate 32 parts of the body. And you realize that it's just a sack of skin. And why would you take pride in something that's going to go away anyway? And you probably had millions of sacks of skin that you've worn. And it's just full of pus and blood, and it gets sick and it gets old. Why would you take pride in that just because it's particularly tall or short, or a certain color, or a certain, background, or certain anything? My ears are better than your ears. Well, they're just ears. So in a Buddhist sense, taking any kind of a pride like that is silly. And again, this undermines authority. In ancient India, the caste system was all about, what caste, it's like, we are better than you and we have a right to rule you. Don't you question that. And here comes the Buddhist, like, none of that matters. Just be a Buddhist. So we have paintings along the Silk Road where they show an East Asian monk receiving a teaching from basically a Caucasian monk. I've heard that they often describe him as a Central Asian monk who's probably somebody from the area of what is now Iran, Persia or something like that, or Iraq. And there was no differentiation between a monk from the West or a monk from the East. Buddhism made great inroads in the Greek kingdoms, for example. And there's another way Buddhism changed. When Buddhism started being promulgated among Greek-speaking people and people of Greek culture. I read a very interesting book about this years ago. Again, Buddhism was very unpopular with some segments of Hindu society because it was just like completely against the caste system. So when when some of the people from these Greek states in India started getting interested in it, sometimes it was very powerful people, warriors and kings. This boosted the Buddhists' cachet. It made them. It gave them more. What's the word I'm looking for? Gave them a little more oomph socially. And one of the things that the Greek Buddhists did was they started making statues of the Buddha. And you guys have all seen these Buddhas. They're called Gandhara. It was called the Gandhara period of art, and that's where it has the top knot, right? And in some of the sculptures, he has like a mustache. Now, none of this has anything to do with the Buddha. Did not have hair. We shaved his head just like all the other monks, but the statues like that still make the statues. Those are all based on statues of Apollo. We have statues of the Buddha with Hercules standing next to him as a guardian, spirit. So Greek people started that whole thing of statues, and it was eagerly seized on because before that, all Buddhists used to represent the Buddha was an empty chair, or the Bodhi tree, which we've talked about, the world tree, or just a footprint, which is my favorite. In other words, this guy was here. But the Buddha said, follow the Dhamma. They said, what do we do without you? You look at the Dhamma, and that's like having me. If you can practice the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. So again, another change that happened to Buddhism because it traveled. And we know that there were Buddhists in the Roman Empire. We found inscriptions. I think they found some inscriptions in a cemetery in Egypt somewhere. And again, Europe was trading through the Silk routes and through the sea with India all the way to China. So it's not surprising. And it wasn't just Buddhism that got spread along the Silk Route. You had Christianity spread as far as the Nestorian Christians were spread as far east as China and all over the place. All kinds of cool little religions were able to find homes in new places. yeah, they flourished all over the place until generally Muslim invaders would like to sweep through and kill everybody. But for a long time, you know, yeah, for a long time there was a flourishing all around along the Silk Road. They found some amazing libraries. They found this one amazing library along there. They're always finding inscriptions. It's just fascinating how ideas spread, but they do change a little bit and they adapt. So now, to my mind, for me, and I think this is because I'm a Westerner, just like we all are here, and probably most of the people listening. We've been raised in a society that tends to kind of shy away from anything supernatural, tends to shy away from anything spiritual. We tend to be very scientific and reductionist. So
What does that
for
mean?
me, what's that?
What was that one word you just said? I,
Reductionist?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, that means reducing everything down to just physical processes. So you're reduced to nothing but a brain and some what do you call hormones and you know, chemicals in your blood. And it means basically you don't think that there's a soul, you don't think that there's a spirit, you think it's all just mechanical stuff. It's all reduced down to physical things. And a lot of people think that, you know, they're taught that, you know, the only thing real is what you can measure in a lab, and if you can't measure a soul, well, that's a nice thought, maybe there is one, but a lot of people don't take it seriously anymore. The way they used to. People used to walk around knowing they had a soul. They were raised with the idea that you're a spiritual being. And the thing is, I really think we are spiritual beings, but we've been taught not to be. You know, there was a great line that Bootsy Collins said, "Here's the wisdom from a musician." He said, "We are all fallen sons of property who have, we are all sons of prophecy who have died in the spirit and been reborn in the flesh." So we come from a background where we're not a spirit. We are all. And when I look at Buddhism, there's a lot of things about spirits and this and that, but when you look at what the Buddha was actually saying, you don't need to worry about any of this. It talks directly to you as a human, because all the work you do is on yourself. You don't look outside yourself for a God to support you or for this or that. And it's not saying that you shouldn't or that you can't. We're not talking about those guys. We're talking about getting ourselves together. And in fact, there is the idea in Buddhism that if you do want to contact higher spiritual beings, as we would say, pray. And when we pray, we try to get into communion with God. We want to communicate, right? Communion. In Buddhism, this higher being has a better chance of hearing you if you can raise yourself up to their level. They have the idea that higher beings can barely notice us because we're so mired in all this, you know, samsara, and we're down here with our, you know, our vices and our, you know, our delusions and our aversions and all this sort of stuff. So if we can make ourselves more virtuous, if we can get better control of our minds so we're not hurting ourselves and others around us, then we're in better shape. Then we're able to communicate. So it kind of is similar to the idea of how you should prepare yourself for prayer. And it used to be a more important thing, but you know, there was the idea that if you were going to church, you would prepare yourself, and then you would put on your best clothes, you would prepare yourself spiritually. And then the whole idea of, like, you know, you make a confession, you take communion, it was all steps of preparation. So in Buddhism, the idea is the preparation isn't external, like having a drink of wine or having a confession. The preparation is inside yourself, making yourself purer so that you can talk to a purer being, kind of deal. But a reductionist is someone that doesn't, they can't, it's hard for them to believe that. And they think that the world is just what you see in front of you, and when you die, that's it. So you might as well grab what you can. I mean, that's the end of that philosophy, and its ultimate expression is in the phrase, "Nothing is true, all is permitted." And that sounds fun, but it's so dark and useless, and it just takes you down. How did we get onto this subject? Robert, you're taking us there. You're good. You're good, Robert.
Well, okay, I have something I want to ask you. Okay.
Sure.
To be a Buddhist, don't you have to have the mind as the Buddhist? You know, where you have to comprehend, if I want to be a Buddhist, what do I recognize to be a Buddhist? You know.
Okay. Well,
And
yeah,
and just not that your soul, your mindset, you know.
right. Well,
You have to set.
I think this is interesting because I was talking about this with other people a while ago, with some other Buddhists, and we were trying to, what makes a person a Buddhist in America? Because America is a different country from India, and it's a different country from China, different country from Japan, and the Hellenistic kingdoms. And as I was just saying, Buddhism does change a bit because people are different. And the idea is you don't want to lose the core of the teachings. And that was the idea, I think, behind Navakavada, which Navakavada Buddhism is sort of a little in-joke, but it's also kind of serious, just very informal, but just people who consider themselves Buddhists trying to figure out how we can be Buddhists in the modern world. And I would say if a Buddhist is someone who, well, first of all, the mindset you're talking about, like why you would want to be a Buddhist, right? I take it as what you mean. Why you'd
just
want.
not that, but okay, to follow the line of to be, if you're able to be, if you understand what is it to be.
Oh, okay, the mindset. You're right. Well, a Buddhist is someone, I think, and we were talking about this, just looking at what you're doing. And Buddhism is all about what you're doing. Remember, it's all about action. It's not about who you are. It's about what you're doing, because what you're doing is what defines who you are. So we're going right to the source. So a Buddhist is somebody who follows the 5 precepts. And the 5 precepts we've talked about before, the first one, they call it ahimsa, which is translated as being not harmful, not harming, but especially not killing. So you don't kill living things. It's okay to kill plants, but you try not to. And I think I've talked about this before. In Buddhism, it's about what you intend to do, right? And that made it different from other religions. So if you walk across a room and it's dark and you step on a bug and you kill it, and you didn't even know the bug was there, and you certainly didn't try to kill it, there's no fault for you. There's no blame because you didn't intend it, right? But if you say, aha, I'm going to go step on that bug, and you have the intention to do it, and then you fulfill the intention, so you don't cause harm, you don't kill, right? But you don't do it, like I said, and you don't lie, you don't tell lies, steal, you don't take that which is not offered, you don't engage in illicit sex, right? You don't cheat. You don't cheat on your spouse. You don't get other people to cheat on their spouse, and you leave underage people alone. That was the specific rule. And the 5th precept, you do not drink alcohol, and you avoid anything that's going to intoxicate you and make you heedless. And the rule about alcohol is the one that most Americans have trouble with, although the lying one is another one. But most Americans have trouble with it. And I remember Punadamo, Ajahn Punadamo, in one of his talks, someone was asking him about that. And he's like, someone said, well, what about a little bit of alcohol? And he said, you look at it like this, would you want a little bit of excrement in your mouth? He said that the breaking the precepts is like eating excrement. Do you want even a little excrement? Just a little? No, you stay away from it. So a Buddhist would be someone who would act in this way. He would try his best not to cause harm, not to kill, not to lie, not to steal, not to cheat, and not to drink. And
Okay.
so that's gonna be the basic Buddhist path for a person. I mean, there's more things you can do, but if you do, and in Buddhism they say if you do those 5 things, that is basically going to guarantee more or less that that's what it is, and you will be born as a human being the next time you're born
All
if
right.
you do
And
those
I have
things.
another one for you. Okay. You know how when you walk up and you can feel a tension in the air
Uh-huh.
and they get hostile towards you,
Uh-huh.
but you know not to react, not to show anything, because that like would just progress. You
Yeah.
would rise from it.
Mhm.
And what I was referring to as well too, what are the things, specific things that any Buddhist nationalities or whatever that is acquired to you for you to know about being a Buddhist? What is the things like you got to control your emotions? You know, you got you.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. So what are the basic Buddhist
Yeah.
practices? Yeah. Well, meditation is the big one. There are other practices that go by country. There's a Buddhist calendar, and it's usually lunar. So Buddhists celebrate when the Buddha gave his first sermon, for example. We just had that. Um, when the Buddha awakened. And these are festivals that I'll tell you the truth. I believe that depending on there's more than one Buddhist calendar. So the festivals can be a little different in different countries, but it's all the same thing. But as far as the inner work goes, um, meditation is the big one, and meditation is its own topic, so we won't go into that. But yeah, the idea is that your mind is the most important thing that you have. Okay, everything that happens to you, everything you do, all goes through your mind. And most of the time, we don't pay too much attention to our mind. That's always been my problem. I just do things without thinking about what I'm doing. So Buddhism is about getting control of your own mind better, because we do. We're unhappy a lot of the time. We're not happy with what we do. It's stressful, and we look outside ourselves all the time. I think I told you the story about how I go out with a girl, and then we break up, and I go out with another girl, we break up, and eventually I noticed we're breaking up about the same stuff. I'm doing the same thing. I'm just repeating the same patterns. Maybe it's me. And then I decided, instead of blaming this or that or looking outside, if I had an issue, I would look inside myself and say, why is this bothering me? How can I change what I'm doing to make the situation so bad? And then the next thing you know, I've been married for 30 years. So it was, whoops, that was the married for 30 years alert. No, my other phone reminding me of something. So you want to get a hold of your own mind if you can. And we do this by looking at how our mind works. And that's tough to do. So that's why we meditate. When we meditate, and there's a lot of different ways to meditate. Breath meditation is very accessible to people, and I use it myself, and I recommend it to people. But the idea is that you calm the mind, that's calm and still until you can look at the mind without being upset, because we don't like looking inside our own minds. I never liked it. It took me many years, because there's scary stuff in there, man. When I looked inside my own mind to say, why am I getting angry about this? Well, I'm angry because this person did this. Well, no, that's not the reason, because maybe this person could have done this yesterday and I wouldn't get upset at all. Or maybe something worse could have happened and I wouldn't get upset. And yet maybe just a little thing could set me off. So why am I getting set off? And then I have to look, and I think back, and I examine, and it's not pleasant, because a lot of the time I might be mad about something that was done to me by somebody else, right? And I'm upset about that, and I want to get even. I want to get my own back. And you don't even think about it consciously. You just get these urges. I'm getting into too much detail, but yeah, what you want to do is you want to calm your mind down so you can look at what it's doing, and then you get it to do better things. And the big thing is that we live in our own heads. Most of the time when we're doing stuff, we don't really think about what we're doing. We're thinking about something, about a hamburger we're going to make, or we're
Yeah.
thinking about something somebody said to me like a week ago, or we hear a song. You ever hear a song and suddenly get sad?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's right there is an example of how the mind works, because you might be sitting somewhere very comfortable, nice glass of lemonade, fan going, it's comfy, it's cozy, dogs snoring away, and you turn on the radio and you hear this sad song, and suddenly you want to cry. It has nothing to do with what's happening to you, but it's happening in your mind. You hear the song, you associate the song with a memory, you go into the memory, suddenly you're not sitting there with your lemonade anymore and your dog, right? You're thinking about that memory. That memory is just a memory. It's not real. It's real in as much as you make it, but you're making it, and you don't have to think it if you don't want. We think we have to think these things. I heard the song, I have to think that. No. Well, first of all, you can turn the song off, and that's what I do. I don't listen to much music. I play music, but I don't listen to a whole lot of music, except, of course, Roger's Wonderful Creations on Suno, or Bob's Wonderful Creations, because it takes you and you lose control, and it can make you cry and laugh. So yeah, you want control. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on, but
And something else too. But if you let the music then turns into controlling you in ways that it serves no purpose, and mind over matter as well. You got to, and like when you feel how you say, when you feel a certain thing, your emotions and your mind, the two there works as well. And people, I guess they don't seem to realize that, you yourselves got to keep it all in check yourself without harming yourself or harming anyone else.
Yes, very true. And it's very, very difficult to do. And most of us have never even thought of it. We don't think about it in our society. And it's interesting because when you're looking at how to put this, when you're looking at the mind, it's so important to realize that a lot of what we do has very little to do with what we're actually experiencing. It's like I was saying about, I think of something someone a long time ago that was mean, and I can get upset. I can also think about something that happened a long time ago, and I can laugh and think that was really cool. But they're both kind of delusions, because they don't have anything to do with what's happening now. And one of the things about meditation, and you probably heard about this, I've heard it called mindfulness, although that's not really a good term for it. But basically, when you meditate, you try to pay attention to the moment right now, just what's exactly in front of your face, just exactly what you can hear, and not think about anything else. You can usually do this for about 5 seconds, in my experience. It's not easy to do.
We call, like, if you're like in your chair and you pitch quiet in your house, but you close your eyes, you take a deep breathing, and then nothing you're like you're going into a thing where you're relaxed, but you're meditating both your mind and everything else.
Well, when you do that, okay, one of the things about meditation is that it has to do with focusing the mind.
Yeah.
So you can sit there, and I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do as far as exercises go. And yes, you sit, close your eyes, and you breathe slowly and deeply, and that will help you relax. And but while you're doing that, again, there's a lot you can do with your mind while you're there. So you've got your body at rest. You're not doing anything. You're not driving a car. You got no responsibilities except to sit there. So the mind doesn't have to think about anything, right? You can think about whatever you want without it. It's like, if you're driving a car, you got to think about that. You can't decide I'm not going to. So
Yep.
so when you're sitting there, you can choose your they call it a meditation topic, right? And a really good one is while you're sitting there, you concentrate on your breath. That's what you notice. That's what you watch. You don't force the breath, but you just, when you breathe, then you notice that you're breathing in. And when you breathe out, you notice that you're breathing out. And you kind of like look and see, how does it feel as I breathe? Is it comfortable? Because you can change it. You can breathe a little deeper. You can breathe a little softer, right? And you can even we talk about the breath, but really the breath is energy. Okay. And now this is getting a little metaphysical, so no reductionists here, I hope. But the fact is that we have all these energies in our body, right? That we normally don't pay any attention to because reductionist science tells us they're not real. But there's a really many thousand-year-old tradition that you have energy. When you breathe and sit there, if you pay attention, you can kind of feel energy coming into you with the breath. And the breath is energy. It's oxygen. It's the breath of life. Literally, you need to breathe. I mean, and you do it in your sleep. You do it all the time. It's a constant. It's always there with you. So every time you breathe, if you're sitting there with your eyes closed, pay attention to what the breath is doing and notice, do you feel energy coming in with the breath? Where does the
Yeah.
energy go? Can you feel it going through your arms and legs? Do you have a pain? Let the energy flow through that pain. But the,
It's
the
like,
tough, go on.
well, it's like music as well, a
Yeah,
Buddhist music.
you,
How
you,
it,
you, yeah, you can think of it as a musical thing. I don't
yeah,
see why not. Yeah.
and
And
they were showing it on there, and too they say the Buddhist harmonizes certain things for their mind, their soul, and like went to concentrate on the body.
yeah, that's
And
that's that's a Mahayana thing. Buddhism has and all, I think, Eastern religions, and especially from India, have always concentrated on the body as well as the mind. Now, when I'm talking about this sitting and concentrating on your breath, noticing the breath, feeling the energies, I'll tell you, and this has been pointed out, and it's true, I know from experience, it is really easy to focus on the breath. It is very difficult to stay there because the mind wants to do something else. Oh, I'm bored. I want to think about this, right? You got to cope with that if you're going to meditate. So we have a saying, you bring yourself back to the breath, back to the breath, 100 times, 1,000 times, back to the breath. And eventually, over time, but what else we got to do, right? We're in this universe for like, according to Buddhism, we've been here for billions and billions of years, Robert. We just have new bodies all the time. So we're going to keep coming back until we figure out how to put a stop to it. The Buddhism, it's sort of like being stuck on a carnival ride and you're trying to figure out how to turn it off. And I mean, it's fun, but it's also kind of miserable after a while. You look at life and, the Buddha, when he had his enlightenment, he looked at all his lives, all the millions and millions of lives, back thousands and millions of years. And he said, basically, when he looked at them all, he said, basically, what happens is you're born, you have a name, you kind of like the kind of body you have, you eat, you have favorite foods, and then you get old and die, and that's it. Born, food, clothes, die. It's again and again and again and again. We've been here again and again and again. Some people want to turn off the video game. Maybe there's something else to do.
yeah, one thing I find, o- okay, when you stop to think, how does a Buddhist think of it in this term of of what comes around goes around. You know, like
Oh yeah,
uh,
that's a really real thing. Yeah, karma. We call that karma or karma.
yeah,
You probably heard about that. Yeah, karma is interesting, and it gets back to, remember I was talking about, if you walk across the floor, but you don't intend to hurt anything, even if you step on a bug and kill it, there's no bad. You didn't do anything wrong. You don't have to feel guilty about that. You didn't mean it. In a lot of old religions, even if you hurt someone accidentally, you were still punished, even if you didn't mean it. Buddhism was like one of the first religions to say, "Oh, that's okay. You didn't mean to do it, so you don't get in trouble for that."
yeah,
Um, yeah, karma is, it's your intention. It's what you mean to do, right? Because in Buddhism, your intention, what you mean to do, when you think about an idea in your mind, right, that is going to turn into an action in the world. So you think about doing something and you do it,
yeah,
and then you have the consequences of what you do. And if
but
you cause harm, right,
yeah,
you're hurting yourself.
yeah,
It's like you throw a pebble. I always say you throw a pebble in a pond, and there's some pebbles you don't want to throw because you don't want those waves. So yeah, what goes around does come around. It's
yeah.
I
What
could go
comes
on
out?
for, yeah, that's
But
definitely a thing in Buddhism.
I was wondering, but it's what you don't do as well. It can follow the same guidelines as that too, because it's like if you don't do certain things that could avoid from a person being hurt or injured, you know.
Uh, that that varies with the school of Buddhism. All right, so like in Theravada Buddhism, and this is what freaks people out. Um, Strictly speaking, you ever see that cartoon about the trolley or the trolley experiment? Trolleys run down the track. There's a switch, right? If the trolley goes down the track, it's going to kill somebody, right? If you pull the
Mhm.
switch, it'll go down another track, but it'll kill somebody else, right? You're a Buddhist, and usually it's like an old person, a young person, or this kind of person, or that kind of person, or your wife, or your mother, or whatever. It's always some kind of wild choice. So it's one of those problems that doesn't have an answer. And a Buddhist doesn't touch the switch, doesn't go near it, because you're creating karma and you're interfering. You don't want to get involved. And that sounds kind of weird. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, that's a different outlook. I once read a very interesting book about Tibetan law. Not the law they have there now under the communists, but back when Tibet was an independent Buddhist country, their laws were based around Tibetan Buddhism. Now there, it's different. In like here in the States, right? Say you're out for a walk in the park and there's like a pond and you see somebody drowning in the pond, right? You might call for help and you might look, but if the person drowns, well, that's really sad, but you're not going to get in trouble. In Tibet, if you saw somebody drowning, called for help, nobody came, you'd be prosecuted and died. They'd say, why didn't you jump into the water to try to save him? It's a different interpretation. So it depends on the kind of Buddhism.
Oh,
But
okay.
in general, you want to refrain. It's breaking sometimes when I see how miserable people are, and I want to help them, and I want to do everything I can for them. But I also have to be equanimous because those people are there, and because of choices, because of their karma, I'm here because of mine. I can extend to them goodwill, and I can try to help them, but I can't fix them. And I wish I could. And we all have that where we see something, we really want to help, and we really want to fix it. But there's a point where you can't, and you have to accept that you can only do so much.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to have what they call equanimity. You just have to just accept it and say, I'm just got to do the best I can.
Okay, and
And
I got one for you.
okay,
Now, if a Buddhist walking down the street, and
right,
I know they don't have that much themselves, but they
right.
witnessed a woman and little child on the side of the road.
Right.
How does that Buddhist handle that situation, mentally and physically?
You mean what's the woman and child are poor?
Or yeah, poor, got no
Well,
nothing to.
he will try to maybe share with them or advise them to go somewhere. You know, I mean, even if you're poor, you can share something, even if it's your time and your sympathy. He might want to help them that way. That would be. But he probably wouldn't just marry her to give
Oh
her a
yeah, yeah,
home.
no, no,
You don't.
yeah,
You can't do. Remember, V was talking about how he was helping this guy out, but then he just let him come into his house, and then he turned his house into a shambles and stuff. You do have to draw a line.
yeah.
You should yeah. Generosity is actually one of the most important Buddhist virtues. Generosity is one of the first steps in the training of a Buddhist. In traditional Asian countries, the first experience of Buddhism is putting a little spoonful of in a monk's bowl, being generous. And I heard a full talk once where the guy was saying that when you're generous, and again, it doesn't have to be with money or real things. Also, when you're generous with your time, when you're generous with your patience, when you're generous with your understanding, um, you are wealthy. That's what wealthy means when you have enough. You know, if I've got $10 and I can give buddy $5, it's just $5. But I am wealthy because I have enough to share. And there's people that have a lot of money and they want more and they got to grip onto it. And, you know, they go to the restaurant and they don't tip or they tip really bad because they're afraid of being parted from any of their money. And those people are very poor. They might have a lot of money in the bank, but it's not enough. And they're always worried about losing it. And that's a miserable existence. You know, when I go out, I don't have a lot of money, but I always tip 20%, no matter what, when we go out and eat. And, you know, we feel great about that. And the waitress feels great. And, and it's, you know,
Yeah.
so yeah, generosity is important. You do want to help people as much as you can, but it's only as much as you can. You don't hurt yourself. You know, here's something that might be related to. I'm not quoting this because I'm not, you know, I'm just a Buddhist layperson. I'm not an expert. But basically, the Buddha was talking about different levels of helping people or helping, right? And there are people that will help themselves but not help other people. There are people that will help other people but not help themselves, right? And then there are people that will help themselves and help other people. Now,
Hmm.
according to the Buddha, the highest thing you can do is to help other people and help yourself, right? The
Yeah.
next highest one is to help yourself and not help other people. The lowest one is to help other people and not help yourself. Now, why would that be the lowest one? Well, it was explained to me that if you don't help yourself first, you really can't help other people very well.
Okay,
And
but
so you need to, in Buddhism, at least in Theravada, you fix yourself first and then you can help other people. And if you hurt yourself trying to help them, like I was saying, like with V, you can't just open your house and let them make a shambles. You have to help people as much as you can. But if you develop yourself, you can help them more. So in the long run, that, you know, that's a good form of generosity.
yeah, but what I was referring to as well is what best way of helping is not to be disrespect, but like mental health. You know, if you notice the person, you know, has a
Mhm.
slight, you can do the best that you can to work with, you know, to
Right.
help a person
Yeah,
mentally and physically, and
exactly.
to
Yeah.
and take all the shortcomings of the person, and if you can help them to realize their shortcomings as well, and they deal with it and they progress from it. They're and
Hmm.
like and like okay, and another you brought one thing up and well with all that for you to be part of a thing like one of the real hot up there,
Hmm.
you know, they should be ain't there such thing as someone looking over to see if you fit the thing. You're not you ain't got an alternative motive of wanting.
Oh, well, that's the
It's
thing
like
about.
a person watching your attitude, your how you handle things. That tells what type of person you are, how you handle situations.
Right. You mean like somebody that keeps an eye on people so they toe the line, make sure they're
Well,
behaving the way they're supposed to? Or are you talking about
yeah.
like an inner person? Because we also have that inside ourselves. There's a part of us that can look at our behavior and say, hey, don't do that.
Well, yeah,
Right.
from you outside, well, a little bit of both, but someone that
Yeah.
sits there
Well,
and
you know,
goes,
that's the funny thing about Buddhism. It's not like, in the Roman Catholic Church. Um, if you step out of line, you can be excommunicated. There's rules, and you can, there's church councils. They still have the Inquisition. They can't burn people anymore, but yeah, there's rules, and if you do this or that, and if you can be defrocked. In Buddhism, it's there's not a thing like a central authority, but it's a consensus authority of the sangha of the group. So, like, if you want to, for example, if you want to stop being a monk, you just take the robe off. That's it. There's no
well,
thing. But if you want to be a Buddhist, all you have to do is start being a Buddhist. Now,
right.
what they do have is local communities will police this. And in fact, in Thailand, they have somebody, I'm trying to remember, I think he's called the Dhamma Raja, right? That means the king of the Dhamma. And he's actually a government appointed official to oversee the monks. And if any of the monks misbehave, so in that country, they do it that way, but it's not for the lay people as far as I know. It's simply for the clergy. But in Thailand, it's an officially Buddhist country. The king is Buddhist. The king usually spends some time as a monk at one point. One of their most famous kings was a monk for like I think 20 years or something before he became king. Boy, he made their country very Buddhist when he took over. He was very strict. But yeah, so in some places, but overall, these things are handled like if there was a monk who was like not behaving right, like you're saying.
Yeah. But what
The
I
other, yeah, the other monk would handle it through. They have a thing where, and I think it's the Christina Festival. I could be wrong. I'll get corrected in the comments. Where, oh no, it's the Rains Retreat. Excuse me. Where they have a thing where you basically can ask people about, or you can be accused. Basically, you stand up and say, "Does anyone know anything I did bad?" And then the other monks get to say, "Yeah, you know what? You were doing this. You were practicing medicine, or you were, I don't know, selling ice cream. I don't know, whatever musical instrument, which monks aren't supposed to do." So they can discipline them that way. If they get really bad, they can be kicked out of the sangha, but
oh,
it's a group decision thing. There isn't like a central authority unless it's like Thailand, and then they do have a central authority, but just for
okay.
Thailand.
Because what I was asking that for is because you as a person, okay, if you witness you yourself how a person acts, how he handles certain situations,
Uh huh.
that it's not the way of a Buddhist.
Right.
Not to run the guy down, no nothing.
Right.
But if someone was to walk up to you and ask you three simple questions, would you trust that person? Or if someone was to ask you if you could, would you have him do something? Okay, you would look and say, well, I'm not going to go do that because I have my reasons. But I witness it, I don't know how you would phrase it, but I
Uh,
would I wouldn't say I would depend on the person
Right.
because of his actions.
Well, yeah,
You
there's
know,
people that, I always say you have to know how far you can trust people. There's some people that I wouldn't trust with a burnt out match, you know. And yeah, you can usually tell by their behavior and so forth. But if I'm a Buddhist and I see another Buddhist not acting very Buddhist, um, I can't really do much about that. It's his karma.
that's
I can
right.
mention it to him. I was getting back to my friend Panibasa, formerly Panibasa Bhikkhu, when he was a monk, and he was one of the strictest monks in Southeast Asia. He kept every single rule, even a lot of the rules that they basically don't follow anymore. There was one rule was that you were supposed to set the certain Buddhist festivals by observing the stars. Well, nobody does that anymore. Everybody has a calendar. He would go out and observe it by the stars, even though that's how strict he was. And I asked him about monks that weren't strict, and he said, well, when he was a young monk and really hot on it, he would sometimes bring up to other monks that they weren't observing closely. But he said eventually, he said, they know what they're doing, they know the teachings, it's their karma. If they, it's their choice to do that, and it's not for him. So there's no real enforcement. It's like I said, it's not like the Inquisition. I mean, if you behave too badly, you can be expelled. The other monks just get together and say, "Get out of here." But so yeah.
Because what I was asking about, like, because you always hear about, yeah, I was wondering about that, if, if there was a person that was, hurting bad or what, you always hear how, I was wondering for the situation, how would a monk take that position, considering that if since he doesn't have much himself, but would he still be willing to help best way he could, and he would know how to handle the situation, uh, you know,
Well, I think most monks would do what good they could.
yeah,
Monks in Southeast Asia aren't really equipped much. They can own almost nothing. They're allowed to only like the robes, and then they get to have like one extra bathrobe or something, or robe for bathing. Um, they can never really help much with like material things, but monks help a lot of people in Southeast Asia with spiritual guidance. And I remember I was really nervous about flying when I was out in California. The first time I went out there, and I had this really long flight ahead of me, and I was kind of like, I'm really worried about this. And my monk friend kind of knew it, so he did a chant for me to keep me safe on the airplane. I don't know if it worked or not. And that's a little superstitious too. It's not strict Buddhism, but I think it works.
well,
Uh,
they were saying that they would have they do follow that because it helps them as well too.
oh yeah, every time you do something good, that's merit, and that's good for you. It's good for everyone. And in Buddhism, the more good you do, it's one of the things where when you share like goodwill to other people, when you think that you want them to be happy, and you don't want them to be happy the way they are. You want them to find real happiness, because when people are mean, when people are cruel, they're not happy. They're not acting, excuse me, out of happiness.
Yeah.
They're acting out of misery. And if they were truly happy, if they could understand how not to hurt themselves, they would stop hurting other people.
Yeah. And I
So,
was wondering
yeah.
too, um, like when it comes
This
to
higher
other
being,
religion, do they like work together? Like if there was a thing that like a house raising, that if they all work together and all that, different,
right? Well, it's interesting. It's kind of weird when you look at different religions.
you
I
know,
think it depends on the religion. for most of human history is most religions got along just fine, or they basically ignored each other. If you go to India, right, they talk about Hinduism, but Hinduism is a word that was invented in 1814 by the British. Really, what you've got in India is you've got people that worship Vishnu, and you've got people that worship Shiva, and you've got people that worship Krishna, and you've got people that worship all sorts of things, and they have their own temples and their own ceremonies and their own taboos, and they just basically ignore each other. The mythology is all kind of related, but that's just so people can kind of have a conversational kind of grasping of each other's religion. But that never really bothered them. And then there were some religions that came out that said you can only believe in my God. And so you got Judaism and Christianity and Islam. They have a lot more trouble working with other religions. Buddhism, I think that, like I was saying before, the Hindus, again, I'm using it as a very loose term, but just basically people in other Indian religions, but people that were into the caste system, didn't like that part of Buddhism, but it was just to them another religion. But the Buddhist religion is different from most of what we think of as a religion, because most Western religion, like if you're Christian or Muslim or Jew, it has to do with God and how you can understand God's plan, your personal relationship to God. Buddhism doesn't really talk about that. Buddhism talks about your relationship to your own mind and how to change what you're doing in your mind to make yourself suffer. Because, and I've said this before, the Buddha said he taught two things, and only two things. He taught about suffering, and he taught about how you can stop suffering. And suffering is not pain. Pain is when you stub your toe, and that's going to hurt. You're always going to have pain, right, in this life. But suffering is when you sit and think to yourself, oh no, my toe. I should never have stubbed my toe. I'm so stupid for having stubbed my toe. Why did I not? That's suffering. That's where you just work yourself up and worry about stuff. I don't know about you, but I've had several traumatic injuries over the years. I've had a traumatic head injury. I've been shot. And there isn't that much pain, but what hits is the suffering. I was once driving down the road and I saw an overturned vehicle. It was like a small utility thing that you just pull equipment around on. It was overturned, and there was a guy sitting next to it, and there was a whole bunch of guys standing around him. These were volunteer firefighters. This happened at a fire station. And they were all standing around, and the guy had a horrible injury. His knee was banged up, but you could see the bones underneath and the muscle. And he was just standing there staring at it. And I said to these guys, my first thought is, well, these are firemen. They are 911. But I said, you guys called 911? And they're like, no. So I said, all right, I'll call 9. They were all stunned looking at this guy's knee. And he's just staring at it. He's sitting there. And I could see in his eyes, he suddenly realized that his knee was injured, and he just started screaming. Ah! And I was like, I wish I had grabbed him and said, listen, dude, don't look at that. Can't feel anything, can you? You've got so many endorphins going through your body, because we've got natural painkillers. So he didn't actually hurt. There wasn't any pain there to speak of. His body was all doped up on endorphins. But it was the horror of realizing that he hurt his knee. And that's the suffering part. The pain wasn't nearly as bad as the suffering. And I remember, I think I told you guys the story of the time I was shot. And it was an accident. It was a ricochet, too, so it wasn't that bad. But I was hit in the face. It was 22 short. It was, again, not a bad shooting, but it was a shot. And I suddenly felt like the whole side of my face went numb, and it felt like I thought I was hit by a water balloon, because I was soaking wet. Suddenly, like my arm and my whole chest, I'm like, what the hell? It was nighttime. So I walked under a street light. You know what I saw. I was covered with blood, and that's when it hit. I fell right. I just, I just fell right on my butt. I just sat down in the middle of the road. I just looked and I just dropped. And I was sitting up and I just staring. And two of my friends hustled me off and they fixed me up. And um, but yeah, so the pain you're going to get, but the suffering is usually worse. Remember when they said the coward dies many times before his death. The valiant only taste of death but once. If you're there worrying about something bad is going to happen, you can worry about that for years and waste your energy suffering over it. And then when it
Yeah.
finally does happen, it's probably not that bad, and it only happens once.
Yeah, but you know what else too? Yeah,
Wow.
like you just said, if you didn't recognize that that's what happened, you would never would have felt the pain, and you never would have recognized the knowledge that what happened.
Right. I had no idea. I mean, I would have figured it out when I finally saw. But yeah, when I didn't know what had happened, I didn't put any. I didn't interpret. In other words, I didn't put a label on what I was feeling. Instead, I just had these feelings because I was very confused. It's the middle of the night, and what had happened was somebody had fired a pistol. It had ricocheted off the ground, bounced up, and it hit me in the face. And didn't break my jaw. The doctor was amazed. He said if it hit a little differently, it would have broken my jaw or gone through both cheeks, but it landed just right. It was actually stuck in there for a while. But anyway, yeah, I was confused. I didn't know what was happening. I just suddenly felt numb and wet, so I didn't put any labels on it. But when I saw what happened, then, oh no, I've been shot. There's a bullet in me. I started thinking all those things, and I started labeling my feelings. And that's when I started getting a little upset. Actually, I was kind of stunned at first because I didn't believe. I'm like, what? It was just like out of the blue. Um, but yeah, you're right because I wouldn't have I wouldn't have had any labels to put on it because I didn't know what there was, and that's an important point, really. So it just shows the power our mind has. Your mind can make you suffer, but that also means your mind can keep you from suffering. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and like well, for people, I know for everything that happens, and they don't stop and think about the repercussions of action, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and can't understand that. Okay, each type of way each religion is okay, and people just don't seem to realize that religion is religion, regardless of what book it's from.
Right.
Just work together as one, not individual. Because when you do harm, you harm. I mean, in more ways than one. Even if you do more harm to yourself mentally and physically than what you do to someone else as well too, because it falls onto you, and it's always
Yeah.
going to be there.
Yes. Yes.
And
We do harm ourselves when we do harm.
yeah, and people just don't seem to grasp at the ideal of it or can't comprehend of it, of the ideals of what you do and how what for what purpose is if you feel wrong about doing it and you still do it and you have no it's your conscience is trying to tell you and you overlook it, that don't work good for you because without your conscience being there keeping you in line, where does that say to you?
Yes, that's always an important thing. If your conscience, if you know something's wrong, and you do know something's wrong, and you do it anyway, that's very much hurting yourself. That was kind of like the story I was telling about when I was a telemarketer. I was listening to that expert the other day, Roger, and how they wanted me to tell lies to keep my job. I had to go on the phone and lie to people, and I couldn't do it. I it and I was leaving the building, and the security guys had to turn in on my ID and stuff to get in and out. And I said, I'm quitting. They're like, oh, we always liked when you came in. We always had good conversations. We're sorry you're leaving. Why? And I'm like, well, they're making me lie. It's like, why is that bad? And I hadn't really thought of it, and I was trying to figure out what to say. And I said something like, well, you might laugh at me because I don't know if you believe in souls or not, but I really think it was hurting my soul. It hurt. I could feel the badness of it. And yeah, that's very important. You know,
But
well, go
I
on.
was just, I was just saying, when you lie about something like that, you're lying to yourself too,
Yeah,
for what I've understood. And if you can't, you know, that comes back into you, and like that old saying, it comes back to you in so many other ways. Where does it end of the line? I mean,
well,
everyone does, but sooner or later it does catch up.
it's going to hurt you. And the thing is, it's true. If you can't tell the truth to outside of yourself, you won't be able to tell the truth inside. And like I've been saying, in Buddhism, we want to understand our own minds and get them to work better. And if we tell a lie, we don't like to tell lies. So we'll lie to ourselves. Well, it was kind of the truth. Well, it really doesn't matter. And then you don't think about that. You try to wall it off. You don't want to think about that. So that's making more lies inside of you. And
Yeah,
it's also when we meditate, and we are talking about that, and you're sitting there and you're trying to focus your mind, one of the problems is you get a lot of other thoughts. Now, if you're sitting there and you're thinking about bad things you've done, that's not good. But you want to sit there and think that you haven't lied, that you haven't hurt anyone, that you haven't stolen anything. Then you can meditate better, and again, the people around you are a lot happier. In fact, in Buddhism, they say, Robert, if you follow those precepts, if you don't kill and you don't steal or lie or cheat or drink, you're protecting other people. You are extending a protection to them because you're protecting yourself, and they know that they can depend on you for protection. They feel better around you. They like being around you more. They know that you are protecting them by disciplining yourself, and it also encourages them. They see how much happier you are. And I was saying this to someone else, and when you don't lie, you don't have to remember things. I remember I had a conversation with our friend Bob a while ago, and you guys know I repeat myself. I tell the same stories again and again. It's just something I do, and I apologized to her once for that, and she said, "No, I like that you repeat yourself like that." She said, "Because you always tell the exact same story." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's repeating." She's like, "No," it says, "If you were a liar, you would like change the story each time. You'd make the fish bigger. You'd do this. You'd do that." And
hmm
because I always try to tell the truth as well as I can, as I understand it, Bob will say something to me like, "Hey, you know what, Otto? 3 years ago, you said such and such." Now, I don't remember what I said 3 years ago. Bob does, but she's magnificent and amazing. I can't remember that. But if she tells me that, I can listen to it and say, yeah, that sounds like something I would say. Or I might say, you're remembering that slightly wrong. Hear what you're saying, but I think what I said was a little more nuanced. But I don't have to worry because it is exactly what I'd say because I always now if I was just making stuff up every time I was asked a question, I'd be helpless. So when we tell the truth, for example, it makes our lives better and it protects other people. And in Buddhism, they say the best thing you can do is keep your precepts and encourage other people to keep them. And that offers protection. The worst thing to do, the way to hurt other people, is to get them to break the precept. If you
Yeah,
encourage someone else to lie or drink or steal, that is as bad that's really the way to hurt people. And it's very bad.
yeah.
So,
One other thing too, precepts follows a whole bunch of other things too. Like, okay, when a person knows, okay, if someone's saying that you said a certain word or you act a
uh-huh.
certain way, the people gonna know from what they know of you as a person, what you say and how you handle situations, if it's true or not. And
Hmm.
like with your like your oh, like your moral, okay,
Right.
and your the way you look out at life as okay. If a person knows how you are about them things and someone's sitting there contradicting what they're trying to make it out to be, and all they're going to do is look like a fool, because the person that they're saying that to would know you well enough to know there's just some things that you have never have done or said, because
Right.
they never have heard you as a person say it.
Right. Your actions and their knowledge of you speaks louder than somebody else's lies or misunderstandings about you.
Yeah.
And that's I think that works. You know, I've seen that again and again. People can say or think or this, that, but you know, when they actually see you and know you and experience the protection you can give them. And you know, there's also, I mean, we can talk, maybe next time we can talk about things like the Eightfold Noble Path. There are specific instructions of like, there's something in Buddhism called right speech, and that
What is
means you
that?
want to speak in the right. Well, you want to speak the right way,
Oh,
right?
like
So
a certain tone?
well, no, it's like the things you say, like you don't say, they call it, you don't say divisive speech. In other words, you don't say things that are going to make people hate each other. You don't stir up trouble. You don't gossip behind people's backs. That's divisive speech when you say, hey, did you
Oh,
hear what so and so said? Gossiping and trying to get people started. Oh, so and so said he didn't like that thing you did. And that's divisive speech, and it gets people going. You don't say things like that. Um, you don't encourage other people to anger or to this. You don't say things that well, you say things that are the truth, but you don't abuse the truth. You don't say, you know, that you can tell someone the truth, but it can hurt them, right?
yeah.
If you say it at the wrong time. So the Buddha says you should speak the truth, but you must also speak at the right time and
Yeah,
in the right situation. So so you've got to be careful of how you use your speech, and you don't use it to hurt people,
yeah, but you
basically.
gotta, but you as well too. They have to, we call it, understand what that tone is. You know, they can hear you, but in what way would they consider that's good? Or like, there, people like to say there's different ways of phrasing. You know, one might
Right.
not be good, and the other way might not have nothing bad about it.
Right. You want to tell people things in a way that isn't going to get them worked up. This works also into ideas of communicating to people, which is ideas I've also had, and they're not necessarily Buddhist, but it works with Buddhism. Is if I'm talking to someone, right? I like if I have a friend who's angry, and I have friends who sometimes they get angry. I have one friend in particular. He sometimes gets really upset, but then he calms down. He's, you know, quick to anger, quick to forgive. So something will happen and he might be upset for a few hours, but then he'll get a hold of himself. So while he's upset, there's things I just can't say to him because he won't hear them. If I say, well, maybe you shouldn't have said that, or you know what, this other guy, you know, he's under a lot of pressure. Let's give him the, you know, he's like, that guy said this, and how could he do that? And I thought he was my friend. And you can't tell him that then. He's not, but then when he's calmed down, you can say, well, you know, you did say this about his dog or something. And he's like, yeah, you're right. So yeah, you can't tell people stuff all the time. You gotta wait until, because it'll make the situation worse. So you've got to judge that, like you said, from their tone of voice, especially when you know someone. Because if you look at it this way,
Yeah,
if you tell them something when they're not ready to hear it, they're not going to hear it, and you're not communicating. You're not getting through to them. So you want to wait till you can get through to them. So yeah, that's a very
yeah.
important point. Yeah, yeah.
And they say too, it's not, it's, and when you do, when a person don't want to take face value on, it's not so much of you saying it, it's that it's coming from you
Mm,
as well too,
mm, yeah. Well, you know,
because they
yeah, that's
they
true.
look at you,
They want to hear it from somebody, and
and
this is,
it's like the,
well, go on. I was going to say this is
hmm?
something that we all struggle with. I struggle with it, and I'm not really. I'm not perfect. I slip a lot. I'm not the best Buddhist in the world. I try. I've had my I've had my dark times. I've had times when I've been down, when I haven't, you know, been everything I should be. But I bring myself back. You know, there's times when I'm not good at controlling my own mind. There's times when I let myself slide into like depression or this or that when I know I shouldn't. And I bring myself back. I do. And it's difficult if you're telling someone about this stuff, but you don't practice it well yourself. It undermines your message. It's like do as I say, not as I do. If I say, hey, you know what, you should control your, you should follow these precepts, right? And then I go out and I break them. Why are you going to listen to me? I mean, it is this guy. Or if I say, Buddhism can help you cope with a bad situation, and then a bad situation arises, and I don't use the Buddhism. Instead, I just sit there and I cry, and I sit in a pool of self pity. That's not going to impress anyone. And yeah, I've been guilty of slipping. We all are. We're not the Buddha. We're not the Buddha. But the key is you don't beat yourself up over it. You bring yourself back.
Let me go ahead and say something. If you keep this dialogue going with Robert, he's going to have you on here all night long because he's really enjoying this conversation. So, I mean, my best thing would be like you're going on like an hour and a half now. So if you guys want to, you can come back and do another episode together if you want. But I know.
Yeah, we probably should. I did notice we were going on a bit, but the conversation was going well. This will be a special extended episode, but from now on, we better try to keep it down to an hour. Tonight, I don't have to get up in the morning for work, so it's, I'm a little more relaxed. But normally, if we do this, I'd have to cut off at 10 sharp. In fact, I was even thinking of starting a little earlier, maybe doing it like 8 to 9. Next week, but we can talk about scheduling. But yeah, we probably should think about wrapping this up. I was just going to say one thing I was going to say to as we wrap it up, because there's so much to talk about. We could talk about the Eightfold Noble Path, which are the actual steps you can take towards Buddhism in everyday life. But let me just mention this is something that the Buddha taught his son, Rahula. And he was giving his son instructions in Buddhism. And he said to him, and I'm not quoting exactly, but basically, if you're going to do any action, right, you're going to decide you're going to do something. First, ask yourself if this is going to cause harm. Is it going to break a precept, for example, or do anything like that? And if you say, no, it's not going to cause harm, then you do it. Now, while you're doing it, if you see it causes harm, you stop, right? But if it doesn't, well, you keep doing it. And then you look at it and see if it did cause harm. And if it didn't, great. But if it did, then you figure out what you did wrong and you say, I'm not going to do that again. And it's always good to talk to someone who's a little further along, if you can find one to discuss what happened, to help you plan out a way. So basically, whenever you're going to do something, think about it ahead of time. Think about it while you're doing it, and think about it while it's over. And if you didn't do any harm, then good on you. And if you did, well, then you learn from it. You don't beat yourself up. It doesn't help. You can say, I'm sorry I did that. I don't want to do that again, but stop there. And stop there with beating yourself up. And then you say, I'm not going to do this again. That's the best thing we can do as human beings in time. That's what the Buddha said, and I do accept that. That's the best thing we can do is try to make ourselves better.
How about this? Next week we can still come back, but how about we do that? I was wondering. I want to find out about the Africa Buddhists.
Okay, I don't think there. Well, I'm sure there are.
There is. Yeah,
but
I found out that they are.
Well, there's Buddhists everywhere. I bet there's a Buddhist in Antarctica somewhere.
Surprised he didn't ask you about Bruce Lee.
Next week, maybe.
Bruce Lee.
Maybe next week we could.
Bruce Lee.
What about Bruce Lee?
He was really obsessed with the Shaolin. I'm pretty sure he's thinking kung fu or something crazy like that.
Well, yeah, because they were into the thing of they trained their body, their muscles, their veins, and all that to handle.
Well, Robert, you messed up. You should have brought that up earlier. But guess what?
Well,
You messed up. You lost your chance.
no, he didn't lose a chance though. We've got next week. See, he shouldn't beat himself up over that. But and I did mention the Shaolin. I didn't talk much about them. I did talk about China though, and they're a Chinese phenomenon. I'll just say offhand about the Shaolin. I'm not a Mahayana Buddhist. I don't really understand. I don't know much about Mahayana Buddhism, but the Shaolin, who trained in martial arts. That's what they're famous for, and they're trained in unarmed combat, right? This is another example of how Buddhism changed because a Buddhist monk is not allowed to be violent under any circumstances. He's not allowed to be a martial artist under traditional rules. But in China, again, things changed. And from a Buddhist point of view, if you are not using a weapon and you're merely being defensive, then that works within the idea of not harming. Because again, I'm not a Shaolin. I don't know anything about their martial arts, but I believe it has to do with blocking and stopping attacks and without any kind of I maybe they use weapons. I'm not an expert on this, but all I can think is that this was another change that happened in China, and I can do a little more research on the background. But again, Mahayana isn't my big thing, but it is evidence of the way Buddhism changes. I mean, we didn't even talk about Japanese Buddhism, where they don't even wear robes in Japan. You know how the monks dress in the robes? They just have like a little ochre colored sash they wear for like ceremonies once in a while. So yeah, you can have a lot of changes, even growing food, even martial arts. And that's just like all the way they change. But these are all the external things. I'm interested in the internal work. That's why I was thinking about maybe next week we could talk about the Eightfold Noble Path, or something like that.
Yeah, 'cause I'm interested. This not because of all religions, but how they all work to, the difference, but how they all work the same.
Yeah, they all have some similarities. And like I was saying, the precepts are very similar to every religion has rules for how to live together. You've got the Ten Commandments, right, that we've got in Judeo-Christian ideas, and you've got the precepts with Buddhism. The Taoists have rules. There's always rules for a society. The Confucian religion has very, very strict social rules about interacting with people. And of course, there was Jesus telling us, "Hey, let's be nice to each other for a change." Let's. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of ways where religions can work together, I think. Because I think ultimately we all want to be happy, and we all work very hard to be happy, but most of the time we're not successful. And the things we do to make ourselves happy very often make us miserable. Fifth precept, alcohol, perfect example of that. So Buddhism is trying to show us a good, smart, skillful way to be happy, and so a happiness that doesn't harm other people. Because if your happiness depends on making other people unhappy, if nothing else, they're not going to stand for it. They're not. They're going to be upset, and that's going to be bad karma, and they're going to be getting back at you, and then you have to defend yourself, right? And it just becomes a cycle of struggle. And we don't want that. We want to be happy, and we want other people to be happy. So yeah, let's all be happy. And I think I see, oh my goodness, Roger, I think I see the signal light from the undisclosed location in the Himalayan mountains where we'll be making our landing at Chambala International Airport very soon. So we're going to have to make our descent. Before we do that, though, maybe we should give our socials.
Okay. Roger, you want to do that? You're a lot better than what I am.
Roger's the socials.
Yeah, with Robert and with me, you can find us on minds.com at Roger_Hanson. You can also find me at Roger Hanson or Roger Hanson at ROGLOL1973. Robert has his own YouTube channel. You can check him out on YouTube at his channel, Robert Hanson. You can also find me at The Wonderful World of Weirdness on Discord, and Roger's Hangout on Elements Matrix, as well as on Teams. And if you want to talk to Robert, you can talk to him through all the socials I gave you. So that's it.
Excellent. And of course, if you want to know more about me, you can check out my website, navakavada.org. That's NAVAKAVADA. It's spelled just like it sounds. I'm also on minds.com. Otto_X is my username. That's EX. I spell it the fancy way. I can be found many of the places that Roger's at, Roger's Hangout, for example. And of course, Messenger Pigeon sometimes reaches me. I do hope that our discussion tonight has been interesting. If you've liked what you've heard, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment. We love comments as long as they're within YouTube and/or Rumble guidelines. We will respond to every comment. Leave us an emoji. We love emojis. I love emojis. I think they're just wonderful. And I will say that as far as my discussion of Buddhism, I always give the caveat that my ignorance of Buddhism is vast. I'm sure I very well have made some technical errors here or there. If you've caught me out on anything, please comment. I am always open to correction. As the Buddha said, people who point out a flaw in us should be regarded as someone who is pointing out treasure, because when we see a flaw, we can correct it. All right, I'm going to begin our final descent. I am turning on the seatbelt light. Please bring your seats to a upright position and buckle up. The smoking lamp is unfortunately turned off. Attendants will be coming by to gather up hash pipes, rolling papers, or anything else you might be using. And we're beginning our final descent to Shambhala International Airport here with Roger Hanson, my co-pilot and electronics warfare officer, very necessary job, and our special guest, Robert Hanson, who's been acting as supercargo. We'll make him the supercargo on our ship. And hopefully you've had a pleasant flight. Please enjoy your stay at Shambhala. The temperature is a balmy 74 degrees. Those of you who are going on to Agartha can just stay on board. Otherwise, you'll be leaving our ship there. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you next week.
Robert.
And we've landed.
All right, we got it all done. I got the recording stopping, and
Excellent.
and the I want to apologize to everybody on YouTube. We missed about 15 to 20 minutes, but there is a full hour on there. It's just not the beginning part. The full recording is on I've recorded the whole thing basically, but
Cool.
YouTube missed a little bit of time, and on Rumble as well as Kick and Twitch. Well, not Twitch because it doesn't keep a recording, but on Kick and Rumble you can watch the full video there. Or just wait for me to edit it and come out with it. I just want to say that to everybody, whoever's watching. And Mark Edworthy came in to troll the chat.
Good Lord Edworthy.
Lord Edworthy. He got mad at me earlier, so he's wanting to get retribution in the chat area. He's thanks for stopping by, Edworthy. We appreciate that. And I'll end the stream. Let me see here.